matter of the cerebrum. Now we will do the white matter of the cerebrum. So in the cerebrum, the grey matter lies outside and the white matter lies inside. In some part, other part of the brain, it is reverse. So in order to see the white matter, we have to cut the cerebrum in different ways. Sometimes we have to cut horizontally, sometimes we have to cut in the sagittal section, sometimes we have to cut the cerebrum in the coronal section also to show the white matter. So if we talk about the white matter, means we are talking about the bundles and bundles of the nerve fibers or the axons of the neuron. And when we study the white matter of the cerebrum, then we came to know that the white matter of the cerebrum consists of three types. Number one type is the association fibers. The type 2, they are the commissural fibers. And type 3, they are the projection fibers. So three types of the fibers or the white matter we encounter in the cerebrum. So we will take one by one. First of all, we will take the association fibers. As the name suggests, association means these axons or the nerve fibers, they join the cerebrum grey matter, but they remain on the same side. They do not cross the midline, and according to their length we divide them into the short or the long association fibers. So they associate the grey matter of the same side of the cerebrum. So when we cut the sagittal section of any part of the cerebrum, what we see that the grey matter of the cerebrum, that is called the gyri, and it is called the also called the peripheral part, that is called the cortex, also called the cerebral cortex. So these cerebral cortex or the cortical area, they are visible when we cut the sagittal section, and the grey matter of the neighboring gyri, they are interconnected. So these interconnections of the grey matter of the neighboring gyri, so they constitute the short type of the association fibers. Then there are certain areas of the cerebrum where these gyri, they are widely separated, and the grey matter is connected to a long distance. So these are called the long association fibers, and it is seen in the cingulum. So this is the frontal lobe, this is the parietal lobe. So the parietal lobe is interconnected with the frontal lobe, and this is the comes under the long association fibers. Similarly, the frontal lobe is connected to the parietal lobe, and then it is also connected to the occipital lobe also. So frontal lobe is also connected to the occipital lobe with the help of the superior longitudinal fasciculus. They are called the superior longitudinal fasciculus. Similarly, the frontal lobe is also connected to the temporal lobe and also the occipital lobe as well. So these are called the long association fibers, and they are called the inferior longitudinal fasciculus. The superior and the inferior longitudinal fasciculus, they connect the frontal with the occipital and frontal with the temporal lobes. So these are the types of the, but main you have to think that they remain on the same side of the cerebrum. They do not go on the, so the different cortical areas of the cerebrum, they are interconnected, but they remain on the same side. That is the character of the association fibers. The second variety is the commissural fibers. So C for cross, remember. So commissural fibers, they cross the midline and they connect the gray matter of the right side with the gray matter of the left side. So such bundles of the axons or the nerve fibers which interconnect the right cerebral cortex with the left cerebral cortex, they come under the what is called the commissural fibers. So various commissural fibers we have to study. These are called, for example, anterior commission fibers. Then there are posterior commissural fibers. Then there are fornix. Then there are habenular commission. Then there are Hippocampal Commission. And there are optic chiasma also. And last but not least, the Corpus Callosum. So these are the 7 types of the fibers when we dissect the cerebral hemisphere and when we see that they are crossing the midline. So we will take one by one. So first is the anterior commission. So this anterior commission, it lies, as the name suggests, in the anterior part. Or it lies in the frontal lobe, and it connects the right frontal lobe with the left frontal lobe, and this type of the commissural fibers, they lie in the lamina terminalis. As we know, the lamina terminalis is the continuation of the rostrum of the horizontal part of the corpus callosum. So these fibers, they are present in the lamina terminalis. And in the frontal lobe, when they go, they divide into lateral and the medial bundles. The lateral bundle goes into the temporal lobe, while the medial bundles, fibers, from anterior commission, they go to the olfactory stria and the olfactory tract. So that is how the anterior commission fibers are. Similarly, there are also the posterior commission. The posterior commission fibers, they are present posteriorly, just in relation to the continuation of the third ventricle with the cerebral aqueduct. So as we know, the brain is having the hollow inside, and midbrain is the smallest part of the brain, the superior and the inferior colliculus, and The cavity of the midbrain is called the cerebral aqueduct. And the cerebral aqueduct is continuous with the third ventricle. So where this third ventricle is continuous with the cerebral aqueduct, so this posterior commission lies in relation to this. So these posterior commissural fibers, they are present in relation to the inferior stalk of the pineal gland, which form the pineal recess of the third ventricle. So they are connected or situated just above the cerebral aqueduct, where the third ventricle is continuous with the cerebral aqueduct, and they are in relation to the inferior stalk of the pineal gland. And these fibers, they interconnect the part of the cerebrum of the right side with the left side. So they are connecting the temporal lobe mainly of the right with the left side. Then comes the commissural fornix. As we have done the hippocampus. Now from the hippocampus is made up of grey matter. So from the hippocampus and the dentate gyrus, the white matter comes out, and these white fibers or the grey white matter forms a thin film of the white matter over the hippocampus. And this thin film of the white matter is called alveus. And all these white matter of the alveus, they come to lie on the medial aspect of the hippocampus, and all these fibers, they collect together medially and they run posteriorly. So this alveus is like a cream over the hot milk, and all these fibers, when they converge medially in relation to the hippocampus, so they are called fimbria. So this is the part of the fornix. Then all the fimbria or the axons, they run posteriorly, and as they go posteriorly, they are compact together. They are closer, and this compact mass of the white matter, now its name is the crus. Crus means bundle. So they form a bundle posteriorly just below the splenium of the corpus callosum. So this bundle is called the crus of the fornix. Then the crus of the right side meet with the crus of the left side. So two crura, they join together below the corpus callosum. And when both the crura of the right and left cerebral hemisphere, they join in the midline, now its structure so formed is called the body of the fornix. Now it is called body. And when we trace this, so this body of the fornix lies below the body of the corpus callosum, or trunk of the corpus callosum. And when we trace this body anteriorly, what we see, that it divides into two columns. So these are called the columns. And when we trace this column anteriorly, what we see, that these two columns, they end into the hemispherical structure that is called the mammillary bodies. They are called the mammillary body, which are made up of grey matter. Mammillary bodies. And these mammillary bodies, they are connected to the thalamus via the mammillothalamic tract and to the tegmentum of the midbrain as the mammallotegmental tract. So that is how it is present. So this whole structure, that is the fimbria, the crus and the body, and from body to the columns and columns to the mammary body. So this whole structure is called the fornix. So it is also the white matter. As they cross each other, so they are called the included in the commissural fibers of the cerebrum. Now as the two crura come together, certain fibers they cross from the right crus to the left crus, and both are joined together. So this crossing and the meeting of the two is called the, what we have seen, that when the crura of the right side is connected to the crura of the left side, then what is this called? When right and left they both meet together, now they are called the Hippocampal Commission. So Hippocampal Commission is nothing but this is the connection between the right and the left crura of the fornix, which is the white matter of the hippocampus. So other name is the Hippocampal Commission. Then there is a habenular commission. Now this habenular commission, it lies in the superior stalk or the base or the root of the pineal gland. And as we know, in this there lie the habenular nuclei. So habenular nuclei of the right side and the left side, which are embedded in the root of the pineal gland, they are interconnected, and these commissural fibers, they are called habenular commission. So their connections, they are to the different parts of the brain, but actual function is unknown. So that is what about the habenular commission. Then the optic chiasma. As we know, the two optic nerves, they come from the eyes, and these two optic nerves they cross to form the optic chiasma. And the optic chiasma fibers they cross. Again the crossing of the nasal fibers or the medial fibers of the optic nerve. When they cross, they form the optic chiasma. Again, they go from the right to left side. And this lamina terminalis is attached to the upper part of the optic chiasma. So optic chiasma is also included in the commissural fibers, as the medial fibers of the optic nerve, they cross to form the optic chiasma. And last but not least, you see the corpus callosum. So corpus callosum is the largest commissural fibers bundle, and it is visible when we cut the cross section of the right and left side of the cerebral hemisphere, and it is 10 centimeters long. So this is the medial surface of the two cerebral hemisphere, and this is how we show the, this is the horizontal section of the corpus cerebral hemisphere. So when we cut the horizontal section of the two cerebral hemisphere, so this is the cerebral cortex. The peripheral part of the cerebral cortex is visible like this. This is the horizontal section of the cerebral hemispheres. Both, they are connected. So this is the frontal pole, this is the occipital pole. As we know, the Corpus callosum is the horizontally running fibers and joins the two cerebral hemispheres together. So right side of the cerebral cortex is connected, interconnected. And when we see it, the fibers, they cross the midline and they connect the right side of the cerebral hemisphere with the left side of the gray matter. So that's why they constitute what is called the corpus callosum. So they are the horizontally running fibers connecting right with the left side. So its total length, if you measure, it is 10 centimeters. The distance from the frontal pole to the anterior end of the corpus callosum, it is 4 centimeters. And this distance from the occipital pole, the posterior end of the corpus callosum, if you measure, it is 6 centimeters. So that is the dimension of what is called the corpus callosum. Horizontally running fibers connecting the right with the left cerebral hemisphere cortex. So when we cut the corpus callosum in the midline, the central section, and we separate the two cerebral hemispheres, we got this picture of the corpus callosum. As the parts of the corpus callosum, if we study them, parts of the corpus callosum, they are, first is the horizontal part is called the rostrum. The bent part is called the genu. The main thickness is called the trunk, or also called the body. Then the posterior free end is called the splenium. That is the lateralmost part is called the tapetum. And it also has got the forceps major and forceps minor fibers. So rostrum is the horizontal part of the cerebrum. So this is the rostrum. And when we raise the rostrum lid downward, so it is continuous with the lamina terminalis. And it is present in the frontal lobe and form the floor of the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Then the next part is the genu. Genu means the bend. So as the corpus callosum goes upward, the rostrum part, it bends like this. So this bending of the corpus callosum is termed as the what is called, this much portion is called the genu. Genu means the bend. And genu form the anterior boundary of the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Then this genu part goes upward and backward and becomes horizontal. So this forms the main thickness of the corpus callosum, so it is called the body or the trunk. We call the body or the trunk. So up to this portion is the body or the trunk. The posterior most part of the corpus callosum, which is having the free end, posterior end is free, this is called the splenium. So this is the posterior end is called the splenium. The anterior end is called the genu. And this main part is called the trunk or the body in this section. So this is the diagram when we cut the corpus callosum in the central section in the midline. And we separate the two cerebral hemispheres and we are seeing the medial surface, showing all the fluid. Now from the lateralmost fibers of the corpus callosum, which are not intersected by the corona radiata or the descending projection fibers. So there are certain fibers which are present in the midline, near the midline. These fibers of the corpus callosum, they are intersected by the descending fibers of the corona radiata, which has to form the crus cerebri. So ascending and descending fibers, they pass through the trunk or the body of the corpus callosum. That's why it is the thickest part. As the projection fibers, they invade the body of the corpus callosum. They lie near the midline. But the lateralmost fibers of the corpus callosum, lateral to these, from this point to this point, here also from this point. So these lateralmost fibers of the corpus callosum, they are not intersected by the ascending and descending fibers of the crus cerebri. So from this part to this part of the corpus is called the tapetum. So tapetum, they are the lateralmost fibers of the corpus callosum which are not intersected by the corona radiata, that is the inferior. Then come the forceps major and minor. Forceps major and minor fibers are the fibers from the anterior part of the genu part of the corpus callosum. They join the frontal pole of right side is interconnected by the fibers of the opposite side, or meaning thereby the frontal pole of the right side is connected to the frontal pole of the left side. So these are the fibers from the genu. So as they go to the frontal pole, so these fibers, they appear like the prongs of a forceps. Because of their appearance, they are called the forceps minor, because they are only 4 centimeters long. Similarly, the fibers from the splenium, the posterior free end of this, they also have the fibers which connect the occipital pole of the right side, is connected to the occipital pole of the left side. So occipital pole of the right and left side, they are also interconnected. Again, these are the fibers which join the occipital pole of the right side with the occipital of the left side. They also appear like the prongs of the forceps. And because of this, they are called the forceps major. Why they are called major? Because they are 6 centimeters long. This is only 4 centimeters long. So this is how we differentiate. This is the forceps minor, is anteriorly placed. And here are the forceps major, which are 6 centimeters and joined with the occipital pole of right with the occipital. So this is how we describe the 7 parts of the corpus callosum. Now come their relations. When we talk about the relations of the corpus callosum, so this diagram depicts the relations of the corpus callosum. So this is the corpus callosum, as we have already done. So this is the horizontal part is called the rostrum. The bent part, this is called the genu. This is the body or the trunk, and this is the splenium. Now the superior, if we talk about the relations, and in the relation when we talk about the fibers, first is the superior relations of the corpus callosum. So when we see the superior surface of the corpus callosum, what structures lie on the superior surface? They are number 1, indusium griseum. Then anterior cerebral arteries. Then medial and lateral longitudinal stria. Fourth, inferior part of falx cerebri containing inferior sagittal sinus. So these structures, they are present on the superior surface. Inducium vicium we have done. Above the inducium vicium, here lies the anterior cerebral artery. Then on its superior surface, they are also lying medial and lateral longitudinal stria. Then it also contains the inferior sagittal sinus. And as we know, this inferior sagittal sinus, it lies at the lower free border of falx cerebrum. So falx cerebrum is the double fold of the dura mater which separates the two cerebral hemispheres' medial surfaces. And on its lower border, this falx cerebrum is very sharp. And this sharp lower free border of this falx cerebri, it contains inferior sagittal sinus. So all are in relation to the superior surface of corpus callosum. So we have to remember these 4-5 structures touching the superior surface of the corpus callosum. Then comes the inferior relations. What lies below the corpus callosum or the undersurface of the corpus callosum. If we see anteriorly, this is I am touching the inferior or the surface of the corpus callosum. So if I touch the inferior surface anteriorly, the undersurface or the inferior surface of the corpus callosum anterior is related to this is the septum pellucidum. Septum pellucidum. So this septum pellucidum is made up of the neurons. So it contains both grey matter and the white matter. And it contains septal nuclei. And this septum pellucidum is attached to the undersurface of the corpus callosum anteriorly, and inferiorly it is attached to the column of the fornix. So we have done this is the column of the fornix. So column of the fornix is touching the lower border of the septum pellucidum. Then posteriorly, so inferiorly, anteriorly, it is related to the septum pellucidum. Inferior surface. And the function of the septum pellucidum is player. So whenever we are in the player mood, the nuclei of the septum pellucidum, they are stimulated. And two septum pellucidum of the right and left side, they are very, very close together and they form the medial wall of the anterior horn of the corpus of the lateral ventricle. Posteriorly, the undersurface or the inferior surface of the corpus callosum is related to, number one, what is touching here? See, body of the fornix. Body of the fornix. Then, and if we go posteriorly, the undersurface of the corpus callosum posteriorly is free. It is called the splenium. Just below the splenium, what lies? A vein which connects to the inferior sagittal sinus. And this vein which goes to connect with it is called the great cerebral vein. Great cerebral vein. It opens into the inferior sagittal sinus, and after meeting what they form? They form the straight sinus, which meet with the superior sagittal sinus. Then below the splenium, one thing more is present, and that is called the pineal gland. The root of the pineal gland, it lies just below the splenium of the corpus callosum, so that is called the pineal gland also lies there. So this is how we do. With this diagram, we can see the superior and the inferior relations of the corpus callosum. Another diagram which we have to be required to form whenever a question of the corpus callosum comes, three diagrams has to be made. One is this, the central section of corpus callosum. Other is the forceps major and minor. And another third diagram you have to make is when we cut the coronal section of the cerebrum. So when you cut the coronal section of the cerebrum, then how it looks? That is called the coronal section of the cerebrum, the corpus callosum. So when you cut the coronal section of the corona, then the superior and the inferior relations, they are very, very clear. So that is the coronal section. So whenever we do the coronal section, what we do? We have cut like this. The cerebral hemisphere is cut the coronal section. So in the coronal section, first we cut the grey matter. So grey matter is cut like this. Right and left cerebral hemisphere. So this is the cortical thickness, the cerebral cortex of right side with the left side, the grey matter. So from this point to this point, the grey matter is cut. Then the dura matter. So dura matter is having the two layers, endosteal layer and the meningeal layer. Meningeal layer comes downward and they form the falx cerebri, which separates the two cerebral hemispheres, medial surface. And lower border of this falx cerebri is having the inferior sagittal sinus. The upper one is having the superior sagittal sinus. So this is the falx cerebri. Then corpus callosum is also touched horizontally when we cut like this. So how we show here? The cut end of the corpus callosum. This is the corpus callosum in cut section. So in order, with this help of this diagram, we can make this diagram the coronal section of the corpus callosum relations. So this is superior surface of the corpus callosum, and we know superior surface of the corpus callosum is related to a sheet-like structure. That is called the indusium graecium. And in this group, indusium graecium, there are embedded the medial and the lateral longitudinal stria, which are the bundles of the white fibers or the neurons, axons running over them. And on this superior surface, there lies the two anterior cerebral arteries as well. Anterior cerebral artery. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. These are the superior relations of the corpus callosum. Then below the corpus callosum, as you know, under surface is related to the septum pellucidum anteriorly and the body of the fornix. So anteriorly, it is related to the septum pellucidum, which are the two layers. Superior attached to the undersurface of the corpus callosum, and below is attached to the lower border of the septum pellucidum attached to the body of the fornix. So this is the body of the fornix we can show, which is made up of white matter. And between this fornix is C-shape, alphabet C-shape, and it also encircles the egg-like thalamus. So there is a gap between the body of the fornix and the column of the fornix and the choroid nucleus, which lies medially. And this gap between the fornix and the thalamus is called the choroid fissure. So this is the fornix. This is the septum pellucidum. This is the indusium graecium. This is the anterior cerebral artery. This is the inferior sagittal sinus. This is the falx cerebri. So these are the lateral longitudinal stria. And these are the medial longitudinal stria. This is the corpus callosum, the body or the trunk. So this is how we can show the septum pellucidum and the ependyma lining in it, and this is the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle containing CSF. And later to this lies the choroid nucleus, the head of the choroid nucleus. And below this body of the fornix, there lies medially the egg-like large part that is called the thalamus, which is convex superiorly, inferiorly, medially as well as laterally. And they are also interconnected also, which is called the interthalamic adhesion. And the space between the two thalami is called the interthalamic space. And this is also labeled as third ventricle. This is called the third ventricle. So there is a very pencil gap is present between the body of the fornix and the dorsal or the superior surface of the thalamus, which is overlapped by the choroid nucleus. So this pencil-like structure is termed as the choroid fissure. So this is the choroid fissure. And through this choroid fissure, there is an invagination of the pia which goes inside and return back after covering the medial surface of the thalami and the dorsal surface of the thalamus. And it is through this gap or the choroid fissure, the anterior choroidal artery branches, they go inside and they proliferate and divide into a bunch of capillaries. And this bunch of the capillaries is so formed, is called the choroid plexus. So this is the choroid plexus. So the double fold of the pia mater along with the choroid plexus and the ependyma, which is covering the lateral ventricle, or the ependyma, which is also covering the third ventricle, that is the interthalamic space. The gap or the space between the two thalami is called the third ventricle. So this ependyma along with the pia mater, double fold of the pia mater with the choroid plexus. So this whole structure is called the choroid plexus, or is also called tela choroidea. Tela choroidea. So this is how we can show the coronal section of the corpus. Now last comes the function of the corpus. Now the corpus callosum, some people are born without corpus callosum. And they know any neurological deficit throughout their life. So it signifies that corpus callosum is only made to join the two cerebral hemispheres together. But if in experimental animals or if in a roadside accident, if corpus callosum is cut, then a confusion state is observed in the individual or the experimental animal. This signifies that corpus callosum interconnects the cortical areas of the right cerebral hemisphere and left cerebral hemisphere, and this process helps in proper functioning of the conscious level of the brain, that is the cerebrum. That's all today for the cortex.